Well now, good evening, friends. Andy Taylor here. Beautiful night in Mayberry. You can hear those crickets chirping away, and that old mockingbird singing his heart out, like he does every evening this time of year. Pull up a chair here on the porch, won't you? Pour yourself some sweet tea, if you got it, and let me tell you about something that happened back in the summer of 1958. Now, some of you folks might remember that summer. It was a real special time. This story involves our little town theater, the Bijou, and a mystery that had the whole town buzzing for near about a week. And I'll tell you, by the time we figured out what really happened, well, it turned out to be something none of us expected. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start at the beginning. It was early June, and Mayberry was hotter than a firecracker on the 4th of July, the kind of heat where you'd sit on your porch in the evening and just watch the fireflies dance around, too tired to do much else. Now, in those days, there wasn't much entertainment in a small town like ours. No television in most homes yet. Oh, a few folks had those little black and white sets, but most of us relied on the radio and the picture show for our entertainment. And the picture show, well, that was something special. The Bijou Theater sat right there on Main Street, between Floyd's Barbershop and Walker's Drugstore. It was a beautiful old building, built back in the 20s. Had one of those big marquees out front with the lights that would blink at night. Made you feel like you were in the big city, even though we were just a little mountain town. Mr. Foley ran the Bijou, had run it since 1932. Nice fella, about 60 years old, always wore a bow tie and kept his theater clean as a whistle. He took real pride in that place. To him, it wasn't just a movie theater. It was Mayberry's window to the world. Well now, this particular week in June of '58, Mr. Foley had something special planned. He'd gotten hold of a brand new picture, King Creole, starring Elvis Presley. Now, I know some folks had their opinions about Elvis and that rock and roll music, but you couldn't deny he was popular, especially with the younger crowd. The movie was set to open on Friday night, and by Wednesday, Mr. Foley had sold near about every ticket for the first showing. The whole town was excited. Opie had been begging me for a week to take him. Even Aunt Bee said she might go, though she wasn't sure about that Elvis fellow and all his hip-shaking. Thursday afternoon, the film reels arrived on the 4 o'clock bus from Raleigh. I happened to be at the bus station when they came in, 3 big metal canisters, each one holding a reel of the picture. Mr. Foley was there too, waiting like a kid on Christmas morning. "Sheriff," he said to me, grinning ear to ear, "this is going to be the biggest opening we've had since Gone with the Wind back in '40. I can feel it." I helped him carry those canisters over to the theater. They were heavier than they looked. Each one must have weighed 25 pounds. We took them straight to the projection booth upstairs, where Mr. Foley kept all his equipment. Now, the projection booth at the Bijou was Mr. Foley's domain. It was a small room, maybe 10 by 12 feet, with 2 big projectors, shelves full of film reels, and a little window that looked out over the theater seats. Smelled like hot metal, and that distinctive smell of film, kind of sweet and chemical at the same time. "I'll check these over tonight," Mr. Foley said. "Make sure everything's in order for tomorrow's showing. Can't have any problems, not with this crowd." I bid him good evening and went on about my business. Had no idea that the next morning I'd be back there investigating a mystery. Friday morning, about 8:30, I was at my desk at the courthouse, going through some paperwork when Mr. Foley came running in. And I mean running. I'd never seen the man move that fast. "Sheriff, Sheriff Andy," he called out, near about out of breath. "Something terrible has happened." Well, now, in Mayberry, something terrible usually means old man Kelsey's cows got loose again, or maybe somebody backed into a fire hydrant. So I wasn't too alarmed, but I could see Mr. Foley was genuinely upset. "What's wrong?" I asked, standing up from my desk. "It's the movie," he said. "One of the reels is gone." "Gone? What do you mean, gone?" "Missing. Vanished." He was wringing his hands. "I locked up last night around 6. This morning, I came in at 8 to set everything up for tonight's showing. And when I went to the projection booth, Sheriff, one of the film canisters is completely empty. Now that got my attention. I grabbed my hat and walked with him over to the Bijou. The theater was locked up tight, just like he'd left it. No broken windows, no forced doors. We went upstairs to the projection booth, and sure enough, there sat 3 metal canisters. 2 of them were sealed tight with tape, just like they'd come from the distributor. The third one was sitting open, and it was empty as a church on Monday morning. The film reel that should have been inside was nowhere to be found. I looked around that little room real careful. Everything else seemed to be in order. The projectors were fine, the other reels were untouched, and there was no sign of a break-in. "Mr. Foley," I said, "did you open this canister last night?" "No, sir," he replied. "I was planning to do that this morning. When I left last night, all 3 were sealed. I figured I'd check them all this morning, clean the projectors, get everything ready for the 7 o'clock showing tonight. Who else has a key to this theater?" I asked. "Just me and my nephew, Tommy," Mr. Foley said. "He helps me sometimes on weekends, but he's been up in Raleigh all week visiting his mother. He's not even in town." "Well," I said, looking around one more time, "somebody got in here somehow. Let's check the rest of the building." We went through that theater top to bottom, checked every door, every window, looked in the storage rooms, even checked under the stage. Nothing seemed out of place, except for that missing reel. The back door to the theater, the one that led to the alley, was locked from the inside. The front doors were locked. Even the emergency exit was secured. It was a real puzzle. By mid-morning, word had spread through town about the missing reel. Floyd came by, and Goober, and even Barney, though he was supposed to be off duty that day. Barney had all kinds of theories. "Could be a sophisticated burglary ring," he said, pacing back and forth in front of the theater. "They steal movies, make copies, sell them to other theaters. I've read about this kind of thing." "Barney," I said, "I don't think a sophisticated burglary ring is operating out of Mayberry. Besides, why would they take just one reel? The whole movie's no good without all 3 parts." "That's exactly what they want you to think," Barney said, pointing his finger in the air. "It's misdirection." I had to smile at that. Barney meant well, but sometimes his imagination got the better of him. The real problem was this. The movie premiere was set for 7 o'clock that night. We had a sold-out show, folks coming from all over the county, and we were missing a third of the picture. Mr. Foley was beside himself. He'd already called the distributor in Raleigh, but they said they couldn't get a replacement reel to us until Monday at the earliest. "Some of these folks bought their tickets 2 weeks ago," Mr. Foley said. "What am I going to tell them?" I told him we'd figure something out, but truth be told, I wasn't sure what that something would be. I spent most of the afternoon asking questions around town. Had anyone seen anything unusual near the theater? Had anyone been asking about the Elvis picture? Nobody had seen anything out of the ordinary. It was like that film reel had just vanished into thin air. Around 4 o'clock, I was sitting in Floyd's barber shop, talking the situation over with Floyd and a few of the regulars, when young Johnny Michaels came running in. Johnny was about 12 years old, real bright kid, always curious about everything. "Sheriff Andy," he said, all excited, "I think I know where your movie reel is." Well, that got everyone's attention. "Where?" I asked. "In Mr. Foley's car," Johnny said. "I just saw him putting a metal canister in his trunk." Now that was interesting. Why would Mr. Foley put a film canister in his car when he'd just spent all morning looking for a missing reel? I thanked Johnny and walked on over to the Bijou. Mr. Foley was in the lobby, looking worried as ever. "Mr. Foley," I said, real casual-like, "Johnny Michaels says he saw you putting a film canister in your car. Is that right?" Mr. Foley's face went pale. He looked down at his shoes, then back up at me. "Oh, Sheriff," he said quietly, I was hoping you wouldn't find out about this. I didn't want anyone to know. Now, I've been sheriffing long enough to know that when somebody says they didn't want anyone to know something, there's usually a good reason. But I also know that people aren't always guilty of what they seem guilty of. Why don't you tell me what's going on?" I said, in that calm voice I use when I'm trying to put folks at ease. Mr. Foley looked around to make sure we were alone. Then he sighed real deep. "Sheriff," he said, "that missing reel, it's not from the Elvis picture." "What do you mean?" I asked. "When I came in this morning," he explained, "I opened the first canister to check the film, and I realized right away something was wrong. The label on the canister said King Creole, but the film inside, it wasn't King Creole at all. It was an old picture, looked like it was from the 20s or 30s. Real old film, kind of brittle." He paused, looking uncomfortable. I didn't know what to do. I thought maybe the distributor made a mistake, sent us the wrong reel. But then I started looking at the film more carefully, and Sheriff, I recognized some of the scenes. I think it might be a picture that was thought to be lost. Now that was something. In those days, a lot of old films from the silent era and early talkies had been lost over the years. Film stock back then wasn't made to last, and a lot of studios didn't bother keeping copies. Movie historians were always hoping to find lost films tucked away in old theaters or storage rooms. "If this is what I think it is," Mr. Foley continued, "it could be valuable. Not in money, necessarily, but in historical importance. I put it in my car because I wanted to take it to someone who knows about old films, see if we can identify it. But then I realized how it must look, me taking the film after claiming it was stolen. And I got scared." "I understand," I said. "But why didn't you just tell me the truth this morning?" He looked embarrassed. "Because I thought you'd think I was crazy," he said. "And because I was worried. If this film really is lost, if it's been sitting in that canister for 20 years or more, labeled as something else, then someone made a mistake a long time ago. And I didn't want to get anyone in trouble." I had to smile at that. Mr. Foley was one of the most honest men in Mayberry. Even when he thought he might be in trouble himself, he was worried about protecting someone else. "Let's take a look at this film," I said. We went out to his car, and he opened the trunk. There was the canister. We took it back inside the theater, up to the projection booth, and Mr. Foley carefully threaded a bit of the film through one of the projectors. He turned off the lights and started the projector. On the wall of the booth, where he usually tested films, we watched the images flicker to life. It was indeed an old movie, silent, in black and white. The quality wasn't great after all those years, but you could make out the scenes. It was a romance, looked like. A young couple in old-fashioned clothes, 1920s era. There was something sweet about it, something gentle. The way they looked at each other, you could tell it was a love story. Mr. Foley stopped the projector. "See," he said, "this isn't King Creole. This is something from 30 years ago. How do you suppose it got in a canister marked for the Elvis picture?" I asked. Mr. Foley shook his head. "That's what I can't figure out. The canister looked official, had the distributor's labels and everything. But somehow, this old film ended up inside." Then I had an idea. "Mr. Foley," I said, "do you keep records of all the films you've shown here at the Bijou?" He nodded. "Yes, sir. I've got ledgers going all the way back to when I started in 32. My uncle kept records before that, too." "Let's take a look at those old records," I suggested. "Maybe we can figure out what this film is and how it got mixed up with the Elvis picture. We spent the next hour going through Mr. Foley's records. Those old ledgers were fascinating, I'll tell you. Every movie that had played at the Bijou, the dates, the attendance, even little notes about special events. In the ledger from 1928, we found something interesting. There was an entry for a film called The Promise, released in September of that year. Next to it, Mr. Foley's uncle had written a note. Film never arrived from distributor. Canister received empty. Show canceled. Refunded all tickets. Very disappointing. The Promise, Mr. Foley said quietly. "I've heard of that picture. It was supposed to be a beautiful romance, but it disappeared. Most people thought all the copies were destroyed in a studio fire in the 30s. If this is that film, if we found it after all these years," he trailed off, shaking his head in wonder. We sat there for a moment, taking it all in. Then Mr. Foley said, "But Sheriff, that still doesn't explain how it ended up in the King Creole canister." I thought about that. "Sometimes," I said, "mysteries have simple explanations. What if, back in 28, when that empty canister arrived here, your uncle sent it back to the distributor? And what if someone at the distributor, not knowing what else to do with it, stored it away? Over the years, canisters get reused, labels change, and maybe somewhere along the line, somebody put this old film in that canister and forgot about it. Then, when they were preparing the Elvis picture, they grabbed what they thought was an empty canister, filled it with one of the reels, and sent it out. Except it wasn't empty. It had The Promise inside, and that's what you got instead of the third reel of King Creole. Mr. Foley thought about that. "That would mean," he said slowly, "that the third reel of the Elvis picture is probably still sitting on a shelf somewhere at the distribution warehouse, and they have no idea." "Exactly," I said. "Well," Mr. Foley said, "we better call them again and explain what happened. They'd probably think I'm crazy, calling about a missing reel that I apparently have." We went downstairs, and Mr. Foley got on the telephone with the distributor in Raleigh. It took some explaining, and I could hear the confusion in the voice on the other end of the line, but eventually they understood. They promised to check their warehouse right away, and if they found the missing reel, they'd have someone drive it down to Mayberry that very evening. Sure enough, about 6 o'clock. A car pulled up in front of the Bijou. A young man from the distribution company jumped out, carrying a film canister. "Found it right where you said it might be," he told Mr. Foley, "sitting on a shelf, labeled 1928. Nobody'd touched it in decades. We got your Elvis reel right here." Mr. Foley was so relieved, he nearly hugged the young man. They made the trade, the old film for the new one, and Mr. Foley got to work setting up for the 7 o'clock show. By 7:15, the theater was packed, and King Creole played without a hitch. I sat in the back with Opie, watching Elvis sing and carry on, and Opie had the biggest smile on his face. After the show, as folks filed out, they were all talking about what a great picture it was, and wasn't Elvis something? And didn't Mr. Foley run the finest theater in the county? Nobody but me and Mr. Foley and that young man from the distributor knew about the mystery of the missing reel and what we'd really found. Later that week, Mr. Foley contacted some folks at the university who studied old films. They came down to Mayberry and looked at the promise, and sure enough, it was the lost picture everyone thought was gone forever. They were more excited than kids at Christmas. They took the film to be preserved proper, and it eventually got shown at film festivals and such. Mr. Foley even got a nice letter from some film historians, thanking him for preserving the reel all those years, even though he didn't know he had it. You know, sometimes things work out in ways you don't expect. We thought we'd lost something, but what we'd really done was find something that had been lost a lot longer. That old film from 1928 got a second chance to be seen, and all because of a mix-up with an Elvis Presley picture. There's probably a lesson in there, somewhere about how nothing's ever really lost, just waiting to be found again. And sometimes what looks like a problem turns out to be something special. Well now, that's the story of the missing movie reel. The Bijou kept showing pictures for many years after that. Mr. Foley eventually retired in the 70s, and the theater closed not long after. They turned it into a hardware store for a while, then it sat empty. But I still remember walking past it on summer evenings, seeing those lights on the marquee blinking, and hearing the sound of movies playing inside. Those were good times, I'll tell you. Good times indeed. I hope you enjoyed that story, friends. Come back and visit again real soon. Until then, this is Andy Taylor saying good night from Mayberry. Take care now.